obviously when slavery was around, so people who have been given permission by their masters that okay, if you earn certain amount if you pay a certain amount, we will set you free. Zakat is to be paid to these people so that they can, instead of being dependent on their masters and dependent on society as such, they can be active contributors to society. And hence zakat will be paid to them so that they can be free, and then they can become part of the productive process of society. So and from there, if we look at if we think even of giving to poor people, the people fuqara and masakin, zakat, that we often think that zakat is to be paid to poor people. When you look at them also, first of all, there is a distinction between faqir and miskin. Who is a faqir, who is a miskin? That also, the split or the separation of the two also points to an important point. But Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, one of the his policy was that when you give zakat, إِذَا عَطَيْتُمْ فَأَغْنُوا, when you give zakat to someone, make them a ghani. If somebody is poor, you give them zakat. Don't just give them enough to last until the end of the month. No, give them enough that they can become self-supporting. They can become established. And then, for example, you give them zakat. You give them certain goods of trade and tell them to start a business, so that they can become independent and not dependent on zakat funds anymore. And so this was his policy. And of course, the result of the policy, what we do know in terms of figures, is that the zakat of Yemen, nowadays we struggle to feed even the people who are at the lower end of society through our entire zakat contributions and all the zakat funds. I mean, last year Muslims in UK donated over £100 million in Ramadan. Okay, but the poverty is still abound or is around and it abounds, and the end doesn't seem to be in sight. On the other hand, when zakat was collected in the time of Umar radiallahu anhu, the first in just one province of Yemen, the first year the local consumption of zakat. So zakat was collected from the people in Yemen and spent as it ideally should be done in your own locality was 66%. 66% of all zakat collected was spent locally in Yemen, and the remaining was sent to Medina for disbursement elsewhere. And in the third year, when all the zakat was collected, there was not a single recipient of zakat who was eligible to receive zakat in the entire province of Yemen, and hence the 100% of the zakat collected was sent back to Medina to Umar radiallahu anhu, and then he even struggled to find anybody who would be eligible to receive zakat there. And this shows the power of zakat, the potential of zakat, and also it shows that, and the Quran tells us that zakat was not something that is only made compulsory within Islam, within our religion. It's been an obligation even in previous nations, previous scriptures, and even in previous scriptures it comes alongside prayer. So prayer and zakat go hand in hand. They have a reciprocal connection. Zakat, prayer, or the validity or the value of prayer can be measured with a society's contribution towards its poor, with how a society looks at its weaker elements, how it is focused on ensuring that they also can be mobilized to have a good quality of life. And on the other hand, giving zakat ensures that a person becomes there are many benefits of giving zakat. Some of them are you have empathy, you realize your own neediness towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that enhances the level of your prayer, the level of your the quality of your worship, etc. And finally, one final point, that this whole institution of zakat, so zakat is an institution. Zakat was collected institutionally in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and in the time of Khulafa Rashidun, and even after that, it was not simply enough that you give in charity and that's it, your job is done. No, you have to give zakat to the central government, and then the disbursement of zakat was also done on an institutional basis. So this is the understanding of zakat that we must have. What do we do nowadays? Of course, we don't have those institutions. We have to first and foremost try as Muslims, because as we try to establish masajid, as we try to establish other things, we have to try to establish mechanisms for collection and distribution of zakat in a proper manner. And alhamdulillah, to a significant extent we can say that organizations such as those that cater for this need of the Muslim community do exist. And there are many charities that make that have a very robust program for zakat distribution, but not collection, obviously, because it remains as a voluntary thing. So we need to educate our community about the meaning of zakat, the function of zakat, how zakat is supposed to be given as given as on an institutional level and for a specific purpose which is greater than simply poverty alleviation. We must first and foremost try to give zakat ourselves. If we are obliged to give zakat, it is compulsory for us to take our zakat. And zakat is the minimum. Zakat is not the maximum that we should give or we must give. Sahaba radiallahu anhu ajma'in treated zakat as a very minimum that they would give. Less than that is not acceptable. More than that is, of course, much more rewarding in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are some of the points that I thought we can mention, and again, this connects very beautifully with what Surah Al-Ma'un teaches us about our ihsan. So if a prayer does not, we can say simply in closing that the quality of a society, of a society's prayer, of a community's prayer, can be judged, or can be, not judged in a sense that we judge people by that, but can be, a very good measure of the quality of the people's, of a community's worship is how it looks after its weaker constituents and weaker people of that community. And hence the zakat, the connection between zakat and salat is not just instrumental, it is it's an essential one. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to act upon what's been said. We'll take a few questions and inshallah.
So we're not concerned by rushing for prayers today, so if there are questions, obviously we could ask questions. We do obviously try and stick to time. I think one of our earlier reminders was about the importance of time, so we will try and stick to time. So if anybody's able to get away, please feel free to get away. If there are any questions about what we talked about today, I guess we'll open up another discussion about zakah more generally. If the question about zakah, fasting, prayer, or discuss today, please feel free.
I just had one. So if someone was to approach giving their zakat in the way that they give part of it locally and then give part of it abroad. So it's sort of in terms of priority, they would give it firstly within the family, and then within the local community, and then sort of like at a wider level. Is that a good approach, or what would your thoughts be around that?
You see, what we spoke of was actually the ideal. So when everybody was giving zakat, and much more than their zakat, then the priorities would be slightly different. And the priorities then were that you collect it and spend it in local community, because that would fulfill the need of the entire, you can say the entire Muslim world of that time. Unfortunately, and it's a quite sad fact that many Muslims today don't give the zakat, don't have a clear understanding about the importance of zakat, and even if they do, they fail to fulfill this obligation, and hence we have a very limited giving of zakat. So we have very limited zakat funds. How they must be distributed, again, it's a question that everybody has to think about, I think individually or as you said, locally. How can we give zakat? What we must not do, though, is not to restrict our giving of zakat always to a certain group of individuals or people or a community, etc., at the exclusion of others. Sometimes disasters strike man-made or non-man-made, and there is a need for immediate help and relief. And in that case, if the need is greater there, then we must give our zakat there. But then, unfortunately, as we are seeing nowadays, there are conflicts and these man-made conflicts, of course. They are all sort of becoming perpetual, and may Allah ease the pain of all the people affected. But then, if we give zakat there only, then we ignore our own family members, and it should be, and that should not be the case. Who are eligible for zakat, or our local communities who are eligible for zakat. There are many people in UK who are eligible to receive zakat, and nobody knows about them. So we must try to, like you said, a good approach is to sort of divide our zakat under normal circumstances between different sources of its distribution, or different avenues of its distribution rather. So some for the family members, some for local community, and some for international aid, etc. Which so I think the answer probably is that it must be judged on an individual basis, circumstantial basis.
Mind if I ask something exactly? And then do you mind if I ask something exactly and come back to you from that? Just a clarification from my own job. So if you're splitting your zakat, if you calculate it to 2.5% as a bare minimum, or whatever it is that you're saving on, etc. If you're splitting it, does that mean you have to give all of the zakat that is due to a single person? So you meant to transfer ownership of whatever you're giving in zakat to an individual. If you're splitting it, does that not mean that you're splitting what you're meant to be transferring in terms of ownership?
No, well, you see, what was again, that was giving all your zakat to one person and making sure that they are they get the full benefit of it, so that they can come out of their neediness. That's the ideal, and I think if you do that, that would be a very good thing. But then we have to be realistic, and when fuqaha initially, it was a condition that every individual's zakat, because in the time of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhu, I believe, or just about around about that time, the central collection of zakat was restricted to collection of, because obviously it became too much of a bureaucratic process, and hence your monetary zakat on your wealth, you would give out on your own. And fuqaha and what would be collected centrally was the zakat on animals and on goods of trade, on business and these kind of things. And fuqaha then wrote that a person has to, for his zakat or her zakat to be valid, he or she must give their zakat to all 8. They split the zakat to all 8 avenues of its expenditure, which are mentioned in the Quran. And later on, when after the sacking of Baghdad in the 12th century, when it became difficult for people to even manage that, and then the fatwa was given, okay, fine, if you give to one avenue, then it's fine. So there have been a lot of concessions throughout history in the manner of giving zakat, and so nowadays, and if today, if all the Muslims were to give their zakat as they must be given, then we would be able to talk in an ideal of ideal situations, and ideal circumstances, and ideal scenarios. But since that is not the case, we have to do what's best for on an individual basis. So if we feel that empowering a person, our zakat will, if given to the person in the right manner, will empower them enough, then that would be an ideal thing to do.
Sorry about that.
I had a question about the beginning, the Islam, Iman and Ihsan. I wanted to link that to the Surah Al-Asr, where it's the last ayah is about those who believe, do righteous deeds, and join each other in truth and patience. And I know certain scholars look at the way that things are put in the Quran in terms of priority. So the first thing is belief, that's more important than the actions. I think that's one way of looking at it, if I'm not wrong. I've always thought of that as a cycle, like you mentioned, the Iman, Islam and Ihsan, that without the enjoining each other to truth and the patience, you can never achieve the excellence of Iman and Islam. And it's almost like patience needs to be there first for you to be able to believe despite certain doubts, and then do actions despite you might not want to do them for whatever reason. So is it correct in saying that enjoining each other into truth and patience is part of, like, it's a foundation of ihsan? Or is that something that is part of all three? I mean, just to elaborate.
No, it's a good question. As I said, there must be some entry point into this cycle. And the entry point is shahada, of course. And when we say shahada, there can be shahada with a doubt. There cannot be. It is something that we have to rectify before we take the shahada. And it's very simple. We have to believe. If you believe, I mean, I had I was a couple of months ago, somebody came to my office and said, I just want to use you as a sounding board. I want to accept Islam, I'm ready, but I have certain doubts. Fine, I'll listen. And he said that I believe in, I have removed the mental challenge in believing in the existence of a divine. That's the first step. And I also believe in the angels. But I have doubt about jinn. I don't believe in jinn. And I said, why don't you believe in it? I said, it doesn't sit right with me. And I said, when you said you believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is the basis of this belief? He said, well, it doesn't make sense for there not to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there not to be a God. And so I asked him that when you believe in the angels, what is the basis for belief in the angels? He said, well, Allah gives them certain elementary, essential functions in the Quran that they carry out, and bringing the revelation, etc. So we have to believe in them because. And then I said to him that we believe in angels because Allah has told us that they exist. So if Allah tells us jinn exist and there is a reason for their existence, whether we know that reason or not, there must be a reason. Because they were wandering, and the Quran tells us that they came to see a prophet, they heard Rasulullah's recitation, and then they went back and tried to invite other people. So they are also entity. If you and he realized that yes, that's true. There is no reason for not to believe in. So the point is that at the point of iman, I mean, whether believing in angels, believing in jinn is an article of faith or not, that's open to interpretation. Of course, the Quran mentions the jinn, so we have to believe in something, some entity called the jinn. But there is an entry point, and the entry point into faith, certain things must be accepted as absolutely valid. There can't be any doubts about that. What we can have doubts about is whether Allah's help is going to come. When is Allah's help going to come? When is it going to? And this doubt can be experienced by all sorts of people. When you have these kind of thoughts and doubts, it doesn't mean that there is a weakness in faith. Yes, it needs to be worked upon. So at the point of entry into the circle, there needs to be conviction on certain points, certain fundamentals. And after that, it's all self-feeding, self-enhancing. So when we because iman, in the context of the Quran, iman always comes before amal salih, because if amal salih comes before iman, it is of no value. And the reason why it's of no value, I don't think we have time to go into that, but inshallah, we'll try to, if there is time on Thursday, we'll try to cover some of that. But there is a reason why amal salih does not have any value, intrinsic value, without iman. It sounds counterintuitive. I mean, people could be doing nice things too, but without iman, it wouldn't count for much. Why? That's an important question. And as I said, we don't have time for that now. But so iman always comes before amal salihah for that reason. And amal salihah is then in this particular verse is not. It is emphasized that amal salih is not your individual action. Because we live in society, within society, everything that we do influences other people and must influence other people, and hence we have to have Muslims must have care and concern for others also. Unfortunately, the idea of religion, which is in vogue nowadays, is that religion is a very, very private affair. You must try to keep it as concealed as possible within the depths of your heart, and show no public expression of religion. And that is completely against the idea of religion or Islam or deen that Islam gives us. Whenever in the Quran, Iman and Islam is mentioned in the context of human relationships, it is always even before a'mal and before personal things, amar bil ma'ruf and nahy anil munkar are given priority, that you show care and concern for others around you. So wal-mu'minuna wal-mu'minat ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd. What do? يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. They do amr bil ma'ruf, they help each other towards good, and they forbid evil. So وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ is an extension of the a'mal, and it's an important point that's made here, is that it shouldn't be restricted to that. And again, what is meant by...
Sorry, the reason I mentioned that is because you mentioned and people helping each other out. So Iman was developed in Mecca because there was a close group of people that supported each other. But if, for example, there's people in situations where they're continuously oppressed, that's going to maybe increase their Iman, but when it comes to their actions, it's going to affect their actions. Because they become, they lose faith in the world because of what they do.
Yeah, and for that reason, it is obviously part of our faith to help all those who are oppressed around the world, not just around us, around the world, try to do the best that we can in order to help them, and that is to show our and to show our help and support in all aspects, and that is part of tawasi bil haqq and tawasi bil sabr. But it's tawasi bil sabr, in fact, goes much beyond patience. Simple patience is not what is meant by